They mocked the black cleaning lady until she revealed she owned the company. Many people claim that one may evaluate someone's character based on their treatment of the janitor. Nevertheless, none of anyone gave that any thought when pushing her cleaning cart, Grace Walker in her old uniform and faded red shirt. With her hair shining through Titan Industries, one of the most influential companies, sparkling doors in New York. Neatly knotted back head down and hands calloused from years of labor, Grace became invisible to the staff members and supervisors rushing around in their upscale suits. They passed her without greeting or a glance. The entire facility was humming with activity as directors and workers rushed to conference rooms set for crucial meetings. Grace strolled over the shining hallways, faint sounds from her shoes on the painstakingly cleaned floorboards. The red among the opulent surroundings of the building, her worn-out, faded shirt stood out with time, but no one noticed. Observed to them, Grace was only a part of the surroundings, much as the tables and chairs. She was the one who cleaned the messes they left behind, nothing every day on floors. Special Grace had been employed at Titan Industries for many years and knew every facet of from the opulent top floor boardrooms to the storage areas where forgotten items were left behind every day construction started from. She watched calmly the strong people walking by, none of which bothered to glance at her. They were too absorbed. All their meetings and major decisions, while Grace just carried on her work silently and painstakingly. Yet nobody knew Grace Walker, the woman wearing the faded red blouse, was not only a regular cleaner. She had been observing everything, every tiny detail, every glance, and every conduct of the employees. She knew how they handled one another, how they ran their business and made decisions, and she, knowing that Tuesday morning seemed to mark the total change in everything. Like any other Grace, she went to clean the top floor boardroom before Greg's crucial conference. One of the senior managers, noted for his haughtiness, entered the room with his colleagues and noticed Grace. Greg missed the opportunity to make fun of her. "Make sure you really clean, Grace," he sneered. "Several of us have a really crucial meeting here, so try not to ruin our morning with any." Greg dismissed Grace in a voice full of contempt, as though she weren't even visible, not even looking straight at her as he spoke. Value of his attention. Greg's colleagues started giggling in appreciation of his brutal humor. To them, Grace was only a cleaner, nothing else they didn't know about. Their comments were not only nasty, but also indicative of a major error they would soon pay for. Grace kept scrubbing the pane with her calloused hands, her eyes calmed despite Greg's. She had been accustomed to such statements throughout the years at Titan Industries, sneers in her heart. She had seen innumerable times the contempt from individuals like Greg, proud managers who considered themselves as the center of everything and never appreciated the importance of others. She always kept a calm and modest manner, as though nothing could disturb her, yet within Grace remembered everything. Luke Harris, another Titan senior manager, found notorious for his. Grace's arrogance and arrogant attitude were only aspects of the building, like the glass walls she cleaned, an instrument unworthy of notice. He thought himself the focal point and felt entitled to criticize people in lesser roles today, as on many other times. He made a sarcastic comment. "Kindly this time avoid leaving any traces. We have a major meeting coming. Don't disturb us." The words were given with a disdainful glare and a half smile. Luke's co-workers laughed loudly, not giving a damn about Grace's opinion, because in their perspective she was simply a cleaner person devoid of opportunity for advocacy or protest. Grace nodded softly, as though the words had no effect on her, and carried on work, her expert hands accustomed with cleaning the filth, so shining the windows. For Grace, this was only a little part of her everyday responsibilities, but her silence was the patience of a woman who has witnessed, and not a sign of weakness. Felt too much behind the glass door. Grace was scrubbing a cluster of other supervisors, strolled by, each occupied with their own task. None of them bothered to look at her in their eyes. She was merely part of the area set aside to tidy the messes they produced. They usually passed her without saying thanks or a. Grace never complained. She carried on working quietly and had a good look. Professionalism, but her eyes continually watched. She had seen it all, how managers like Luke handled their subordinates. ridiculing, insulting, and occasionally abusing their authority to prove their superiority. But what Luke and others? Grace knew far more than they could have imagined. She had seen every hidden discussion. Not only lighthearted jokes, but choices with life-altering effects for those she knew all the sinister sides of. Titan Industries handles issues the directors and staff never considered a cleaner could grasp so. Luke's mocking laughter and those of his co-workers reflected in the room, but Grace said nothing, like a ghost among others. Though deep inside, she knew the day her silence would end was nearing. Luke Harris, the shine surfaces of Titan, had no notion that in a little period he would know would be the most error of his career. His contemptful remarks. Longer be in those crucial meetings, no longer seated in the strong chairs he so sorely wanted to hold on to. His haughtiness and pride would be dashed as soon as he had dismissed and laughed at Grace, since what Luke and his colleagues were unaware that Grace Walker, the red shirt wearer in the faded, was not just any cleaner. Grace had more influence than they could have thought, and soon they will realize that precisely. When Grace determined she would no longer remain motionless, but rather alter the tide in a manner they never saw. Luke's laughter would halt at that point, while Luke Harris's mocking laughter and his associates continued. One person in the opulent room there missed out. Echo. Emma Brown hired a new employee straight out of a top business school, and she had only been at Titan Industries for a few weeks but had silently watched from a distance. Already observed something in the company's environment. Arrogance, particularly from top level. Top of the power ladder bosses like Luke seemed to overlook that down them were people making equally significant contributions. Emma couldn't help but notice Grace Walker, the woman she usually, unlike everyone else, Emma never spotted silently dragging her cleaning cart across the hallways. From her initial days, Grace seemed invisible. She had observed Grace navigating the building with a unusual peace. Her keen eyes seemed to absorb every tiny detail others easily missed, yet Grace held herself with humility and wore a worn red shirt. Emma felt something strange about her Grace. She didn't seem like any other cleaner under that. From the outside, one could sense a concealed confidence and knowledge just waiting for the proper moment to surface once. Emma drew Nana's attention as she was walking down the corridor. It was not the look of someone just finishing their cleaning duty. Emma felt as though New York's eyes sparkled with a wisdom and insight she could not misinterpret in that little moment. Grace understood everything going on in the business, both good and bad, since Emma's inability to stop observing Grace whenever she came into view that day when Luke Harris made his disparaging comment, and everyone laughed at Grace. Emma couldn't help but wonder how they could be so rude to someone like her. She observed Grace's lack of response to carrying on her work as like nothing had happened. It just made Emma more intrigued. Grace seemed to have an inner power that Luke totally disregarded. Her calm her. Emma thought Grace was far from ordinary because of her patience and painstaking attention to every last detail. Emma had heard from cleaner Luke that one might evaluate someone based on their treatment of people in lower positions. Harris and his associates had come clean about their actual nature. Their haughtiness was evident in every phrase and sneered. Their own power and the great decisions they felt to be crucial consumed them so much that they forget it was folks like Grace who kept this huge machine working constantly every day. But maybe Emma felt a change and knew they would shortly come to see the truth. Was arriving a storm building inside Titan Industries, and Grace Walker seemed to be. From the way she went across the hallways, her subdued observations of everything around her centered it. Emma knew Grace wouldn't stay behind the scenes permanently. She wondered what Grace was waiting for her, and when the truth would at last surface that day as Emma went back to her desk, she couldn't look away from Grace, who was still softly tidying the boardroom, said nothing but. Emma understood that under that calm facade was a magnificent story just waiting to be shared. A narrative that might alter Titan Industries' whole dynamic and maybe everyone's life working there. With her own sense that she was on the brink of something monumental, Emma decided she would keep observing everything attentively. Something was about to happen, and she wanted to be sure she didn't miss a Grace Walker's solitary detail, perhaps the woman in the faded scarlet shirt. But to Emma, Emma was sure that she was the key to the significant changes to come, and Emma was sure when the truth finally surfaced, people like Luke Harris would not be laughing that afternoon at the mood at Titan Industries might become more strained than ever. Staff members were racing to finish their job getting ready for a crucial conference. It was the annual review, where every top official of the corporation would show tier Robert performance and future plans. Mason, Titan Industries CEO, was a well-known person in the corporate world, known for his strong and forceful leadership approach. His presence not only delighted the staff members, but it made the corporate environment more formal and urgent. Mason had flown from Los Angeles to New York specifically for this conference for top executives like Luke Harris and his associates. Were the most crucial time of the year. Everyone was nervously getting ready, adapting thick stacks of papers, organizing graphs, and refining corporate business reports. They all knew that this conference might decide their paths at Titan Industries. Grace was still in the big boardroom where the inspection was scheduled, still working on her cleaning. She wore her fading red shirt as usual and drove her cleaning cart over rows of seats, getting ready for the crucial conference. Directors and managers' footfall outside the room reflected their eagerness and anxiety as Robert Mason walked in with a sense of confidence and authority. He donned a rich gray suit exactly suited his sharpness. Eyes darting the room, looking at every feature. Everyone stopped as Mason seemed no one bold enough to speak. All eyes were on Robert Mason, displaying a mixture of reverence and terror. He stood at the middle of the boardroom, his palm rested on the big wooden table, then turned about, as though assessing not just the area. However, the folks seated before him stopped him abruptly at the corner of the room where Grace Walker was seated, silently standing with her known cleaning tools different from the others. Robert Mason neglected Grace instead. Something unanticipated occurred. He grinned, a kind and knowing one, and said, "Grace, I believe it's time." The whole room appeared to stop for a moment when the senior directors, who had lately been bursting with assurance over the tables of data, sat in murmurs of uncertainty, not knowing what was going started to rise. Everyone was puzzled why the most influential CEO in the firm suddenly paid attention to the cleaning woman they had hardly ever seen. Observed Luke Harris, who had scoffed at Grace just hours previously, his face stiff and his arrogant smile usually worn on his face. He found it incomprehensible why the CEO was smiling and chatting with the woman he had hated for so long. Not only was Luke, everyone in the room shocked. Their eyes gleamed with mistrust and inquiry as they turned to Grace. Grace set down the rag she was holding with methodical motions, but there was an odd trust in them. She raised her head for the first time instead of bending down, and strolled to the middle of the gaze of everyone from a lowly cleaning lady, and now seemed to wear a different aura, one of power that none could have foreseen. Emma Brown occupying the Her heart raced as she understood that this was not a moment from back of the room. Coincidence? Grace knew she was about to see something quite remarkable, the moment she had been waiting for. Important. Robert Mason grinned casually at every director in the room, and then he said, "I wanted to introduce you all to Titan Industries Maine." Silence from stockholder Grace Walker covered the room. Everyone's breath seemed to be held. Suddenly the room burst into whispers of disbelief, wide eyes, startled expressions. No one could trust what Grace had just told them. Walker, the woman they had disregarded, was actually the company's biggest shareholder over many years. The senior directors, those who had so much influence, suddenly sat frozen too. Startled to talk, Luke Harris sat mute, unable. His face was white, his gaze locked on Nancy, as though she were a phantom from his past. Hunting him, unveiled that everything he had considered Grace the woman in was utterly false. The faded red shirt was not only a nameless cleaner, she was the one carrying Titan Industries' destiny. Suddenly the room filled with shock, and Grace Walker, the woman once looked down upon, stood there with pride and authority. The mocking laughter, the sneer of the past had now fled. Grace had risen and was ready to change everything, and this was only the start. Grace Walker, looking like before all the Titan top directors, stood power and peace. Industries, no longer the quiet woman buried beneath her cleaning responsibilities. she suddenly commanded all the attention. Her eyes were wide with shock and incredulity at what had just happened in the room. It was so still you could hear a penny drop, no one daring to move. Robert Mason's comments still reverberated. In their minds, Titan Industries' primary shareholder Grace Walker's remark had turned the whole room's atmosphere upside down, negating all they had once known. Grace inhaled deeply and started to talk in a calm, but still full of strength. For many years, Grace claimed, her gaze glancing over the room. I had observed how you manage this business. I have not only sat behind a desk in a nice office, but also strolled through every corridor, every boardroom, and observed everything. You thought I was merely a ghostly cleaner. Actually, though, I have been silently watching everything. The room seemed to be pulled from, absorbed every word she spoke. No one ventured to interrupt. Luke Harris, who had before laughed at and denigrated Grace, watched, frozen eyes wide. His face, as pale as a sheet, had lost all the normal arrogance and pride to give way to terror and total uncertainty. He couldn't believe the woman he had always discounted had. Grace kept her voice strong and focused. I've seen how you handle such immense power. The staff members under you, how you value their commitment and diligence. You have only considered profits, but you have neglected the most crucial component. The people you produced a poisonous society where pride and scorn dominated respect and teamwork. Yet from now, Nanae's eyes will be fixed onto each differently. Every director in the room sensed the change in the air. She was no more the woman carrying a mop and rag. She was the lady with actual power, now choosing to employ great power. Enable years of continuous change of Titan Industries entirely have been gradually acquiring bits of this corporation, and today Titan Industries is mostly owned by me. That implies, from today, I shall choose the direction our business is headed. Nanae's remarks cut. The directors started murmurs through the quiet like a sharp blade, but none of them ventured to object. Knowing Grace carried their futures in her hands, some began to fear, not only because of her statements, but since they knew they had undervalued and minimized the most influential person in the firm. Emma Brown was silently standing at the rear of the hall, saw Grace rise and proclaim the truth. Emma understood, felt the undercurrent of transformation her heart surged with. This was a historic event not only for Titan Industries, but for everyone who has ever worked there. Grace not only. She was the regular woman who had created the success of the company from ideas others couldn't see. Nanae turned to face Robert Mason, quietly standing next to her. And Robert and I have long worked together. He is the only member of this leadership team who has consistently shown, realizes that a business is based on loyalty and dedication as much as on revenues. Robert Mason nodded his smile to indicate he exactly agreed with what Grace said. He wasn't just a strong CEO, he was also a man with vision who had worked with Grace from the start and had trusted her from first. Her to prepare for this, Grace once more looked about the room, and this time, her eyes fixed on Luke Harris Mallon, seated frozen in place. She spoke gently, her voice icy and resolute. Luke, do you recall what you said to me this morning? Do you recall the disparaging, condescending remarks you hurled at me while I was simply working? Luke was mute. His face was pale. He did not dare stare Grace in the eye, knowing full well that what was approaching would not be simple for him. Grace moved up to face Luke and spoke with certainty devoid of mercy. Luke Harris is ineffective. Whispers of shock and doubt filled the room right away. Luke sat there shocked, not sure what had just transpired. In a few seconds, everything he had spent his life developing, his profession and his reputation, his power, disappeared from his view. His co-workers, the ones he had formerly looked at down on, now looked at him in disbelief. None bold enough to step in. Grace Walker, the Lady Luke, and others who had once shunned now stood taller than anything she had ever possessed, therefore demonstrating that she possessed more power than everyone in the room. Also shown that ideals of respect and kindness were things should never be undervalued. This is a wake-up call for every one of you. If you don't start appreciating people, this, Grace remarked, her voice booming out like a forceful proclamation, won't be the last dismissal. Grace's remarks remained in the air like a warning to the whole leadership. of Titan Industries, their planet was permanently transformed, and Grace Walker, the woman wearing the faded red shirt, was the one who turned the place absolutely silent. Everyone's breath seemed to be held following N's announcement, and they all fixed their gaze at Grace. With a mix of respect and uncertainty, no one could have imagined the woman they had formerly looked down upon. The one who had silently cleaned their corridors and conference rooms for years was now the one wielding ultimate authority. But more than that, Luke Harris's firing marks simply the beginning of the changes to come. Grace began to stand upright, her keen eyes reading every individual in the room as if she could understand their thoughts. Everyone felt an intangible pressure as their future at Titan approached. Industries now relied on her New York's voice resonating through the room, once more calm but strong. This company will no longer be the same as it was. You have all been accustomed to worrying just about profits, about figures on paper, ignoring about the folks who really run it, have handled the staff members under you as instruments to reach your objectives, and have treated them as though they had no value. But that will no longer be acceptable. The room was crowded with nervous looks, some beginning to worry about their usual roles, leading with force and control. Without considering how their subordinates felt, Grace was now beginning a revolution that would transform Titan Industries' whole culture, and they realized that absent adaptation, their future in the business would be unknown. Grace said, "I have seen this. Over the years, arrogance has developed, as seen by your treatment of the diligent workers who have given their all for this organization but have never got the respect they deserve. You have constructed a business whereby everyone only values those at the top. Others is ignored, but today that changes, and I shall ensure of." New York's eyes scanned the room once more, and every manager sensed the weight of her words. She was no longer the invisible woman behind the cleaning cart. She was a real leader, someone who had discreetly seen and understood every aspect of the business. Luke Harris was the first, but if any of you carry on with the same mindset, devaluing your staff members by putting yourself first above all else, I am here to tell you, if you do not change, you will soon meet the same destiny as him. I am not here to criticize you. We'll transform you. The room was so still that some people could hear their fast heartbeats. They had been so used to subjugating others, and now they were confronted with the consequences of that conceit. A few supervisors looked at one another as though they were trying to find out how to fit into this new reality, but there were also people like Greg Summers whose anxiety stemmed from clearly on their expressions. They understood that the culture Grace was referring to was not only a historical issue few years ago, months, but had been rooted in Titan Industries' framework for many years. Robert Muriel, the CEO of the company, stood watching the whole occurrence. He understood this moment had been in the making for a long time, and he completely trusted Grace's leadership. Since more than anyone, he knew that a corporation could not flourish depending just on its financial performance on foundations, mutual respect, and the capacity to fully exploit every person's skill in them. Robert nodded subtly to indicate his great agreement and support for Grace. This did not go unnoticed by the room's supervisors. They started to understand that this transformation was not merely coming from Grace. Their CEO fully supported them. So, there was no way out now. They had to deal with the change. If their voice softened but still strong, "I'm not here to destroy Titan Industries. This company has to become a place. Hence, I'm here to rebuild it from the errors we have done, where every staff member, from the lowest to the highest level, feels appreciated and valued, cherished. No one here is only a number or a ghost. From today, everyone will have an opportunity to demonstrate their value." Emma Brown is silently observing at her pulse raced back of the room as she listened to New York's comments. This was precisely what she had hoped for when she had started this joined Titan Industries, where she had observed the negative aspects of this company's culture in her brief tenure, but today she was seeing a real revolution, and the red shirt Grace Walker from the faded was the one guiding her. And for those who cannot adjust, you can leave, Grace remarked firmly, her gaze searching the room. Titan Industries one not. Those reluctant to change this company will continue to exist, expand, and flourish, but hesitate to let go. It will achieve this under a basis of respect and cooperation instead of conceit and dictators. New York's comments hovered in the air like a last warning to everyone still in doubt, yet concurrently they presented a chance for rebirth for those ready to enter Titan Industries into a fresh phase. Old barriers of authority had started to fall apart, and now Grace Walker stood atop, guiding the transformation everyone would undergo. Though the crowd remained silent, everyone could sense a fresh chapter starting following New York's stirring speech. Orders the Titan Industries Maurice boardroom still teeming with tension. Everyone sat there, stunned to attempt to process what they had just heard. One thing was obvious. Change had been made evident. The days of openly abusing power, denigrating others was over, while the air stayed heavy with. Grace stopped her gaze to settle on ASA Greg Summers, a senior manager having many years of experience with the organization, was also well known for his conceit. Eager to succeed in his work, Greg had silently watched the whole discussion, and now his eyes showed a definite feeling of concern he was familiar with. He could be next. Greg's actions, not only like Luke's but worse, had produced many rivals in the business, and Grace most definitely saw everything. Grace gently moved toward Greg, sat stiff, her eyes never leaving him. The room grew even more tense as everyone waited for her next action. Palms shaking, he attempted to keep cool, but the anxiety was clear in Greg Summers' mom. Grace noted her voice was quiet but full with power. Do you realize why I'm shouting your name? Greg looked at Grace, attempting to explain myself, but after a moment of stillness, I blurted, I'm not sure, Grace. I've worked hard for this company for several years. I'm not sure why I'm being assigned this. The way Nane expressed didn't affect her keen, cold, hard work view. You believe it's difficult work to step on others, denigrating those without power. You also believe it's something to be proud against. Honoring the people who have given their all for this business. Greg felt the weight of Nane's remarks and realized he had grown overly dependent on his ability to dominate others. Hence, he had no way out now. Everyone in the room was observing this time when power failed to shield him. Grace kept not giving, knowing that a significant transformation was just about to occur. Greg had an opportunity to reply, you have mistreated your subordinates, resulting in a poisonous workplace, and believed that nobody could stop you today, but that changes not only for Luke Harris but also for you as well, Greg Summers. The room instantly burst in fire. Some of the other directors seemed utterly shocked, while others seemed to be murmuring something else entirely. Greg sat frozen in his chair, glad at last the abusive powers were being punished. His face pale, his eyes wide in incredulity. He had always considered himself as untouchable, so his decisions and authority couldn't be contested, but now Greg's hands shook tightly, holding the crumbling piece. Armrest of his chair, trying to balance himself, but I can adjust. Grace shook her head without a glance. He stammered, his voice full of terror. Trace of pity. Your chances are over, Greg. You had many chances to change, but you neglected all. Your actions have not only harmed people, but also impacted the whole workplace here. Titan Industries no longer has space for individuals like you. Greg dropped his head, unable to communicate everything he had built his power. While others around him had maintained their reputation and place in the business, others had collapsed in an instant. Stared at him with conflicting looks of surprise and gratification. At last, someone like Greg was being detained. Responsible for the damage he had done. Grace turned to face the rest of the boardroom, her eyes gleaming with, this is a caution for everyone in this room. Not only a lesson for Luke or Greg, but also a warning for the society of which we live. This organization will evolve. There will be no place for conceitful demeaning of others or misuse of authority. We will therefore produce a venue where everyone at every level is appreciated for their. The room stayed still, but the atmosphere had altered, and no longer was there the haughtiness and entitlement of before. The surviving directors, even though some seemed concerned and thought Grace was acting morally, the invisible barriers of self-satisfaction they had created over years starting to crumble, and a fresh chapter for Phi Titan was just about start. Industries. Grace turned around the room once more, her gaze fixed on every face. I'm not here to ruin anyone, but if you can adjust, I won't let a disrespectful workplace to last. And change will find you sometime in the future of this organization, if not now. Approach no one in the room dared to challenge, knowing Grace now possessed complete control, and they had to decide how to fit the fresh values she was introducing. Or let a fresh wind of change start to sweep Titan Industries and Grace. Walker was the one guiding Emma Brown, a shipmate seated in the rear of the room. Gently, she felt a great sense of trust in the future. This revolution was transforming not only the business, but also her own life, as well as Grace had shown that actual power did not originate in external authority. But Grace turned to gaze at Robert in tenacity and patience to help to transform things from the music roots. Mason nodded at her, a smile of approval on his face displaying his silently observed whole incident. Complete backing for all they had created was finally starting to materialize. Grace had done what none imagined. She was not just tidying the office, but also restoring Titan's whole cultural integrity. Industries where Grace Walker finished speaking, the room stayed still. The director's eyes staring blank. Trailed behind her in a mixture of surprise and caution. Greg Summers had been written off, and the fate of the others still alive rested on every syllable Grace uttered, knowing that nothing would be the same once more, as the anxiety of who will be next was more obvious than. Grace always made her way to the middle of the room, stopping to study every person. The once strong directors today avoided her eyes as though none of them wanted to meet her. Eyes, the atmosphere of the room seemed to have frozen. The invisible walls of power they had earlier constructed were now totally. Now everyone knew Grace had evolved into a force rather than the cleaner they might have readily overlooked. To be reckoned with, Grace started, her voice quiet, but keen, that you all grasp the message today. This is not only a warning for Greg or Luke, but for all sitting in this room. Titan Industries' developed culture of disrespect and power abuse reflects your own will no longer exist. She stopped, observing the strain on the directors' faces. Some had begun staring nervously at each other, trying to evaluate the circumstances. Others silently acknowledged that Grace now possessed all the power. Titan Industries has evolved greatly in earnings, but you have neglected something crucial. The fundamental worth of a corporation goes beyond its financial performance to include its treatment of its people. None carried on the secretaries or janitors' duties. All of them are none of them are the basis of the success you're enjoying. None of them were just words. Warning, but a strong reminder. The directors started to notice Grace wasn't only aiming at punishing them. She was working to restore the organization back to the human principles and correct the ingrained errors within it. Respect that Emma Brown should be silently at the conference any company has. Her heart swelled with respect for Grace. This was not only a speech, but a plea for something more. Back of the room seemed transform, a possibility for every employee of the organization to participate in something better. Emma could sense that Titan Industries' future was under changing shape right there in that same instant, and realized she wanted to join that change. Grace stopped once again, scanning the crowd to ensure her message had entered everyone's consciousness. I began from the bottom. Grace said, her voice was getting quieter, but no less strong. I worked in jobs you never paid for attention to, and in all that time I observed more than you could have forgotten, that the success of a firm isn't only built on the person at the top, but on everyone joining together. This is your chance to transform, to be part of a new Titan is a corporation where every staff member is appreciated, not just on documentation, but also in. The room was quiet as the directors realized they had to make decisions right immediately and carry on with their old road with their conceit and disrespect of others, or fit the new culture Grace was raised in. Grace was no longer permitting uncertainty or third choice, hence developing there was not. Grace looked to Robert Mason, who had been silently compromised. He had remained by her throughout this process, and now his soft smile revealed his observations during the conference. Robert Mason's unwavering support went beyond Titan's CEO status. He was also the person behind the scenes supporting Grace as she silently bought the company's shares and became ready for this period of transition. Thank you, Robert, Grace said, her voice softening with tenderness. You sensed in me when none else did, and because of that trust we now have the opportunity to Recreate Titan the proper way, Robert nodded, eyes full of respect for Grace. It was not difficult to believe someone with your vision. Grace Titan Industries requires a leader who realizes humans are more than just numbers. You are the person. Robert's words spoke to like a popular acceptance of Grace's official replacement as the new head of Titan Industries, someone who would bring the business into a new age using the values she had always held and carried. Grace turned one last time around the room, her eyes fixed on every face, as though to verify their comprehension of her message. You might remain and participate in the change, or you can quit the decision. Titan said, her voice with great power but free from coercion. Industries will now be a place where everyone is valued regardless of position, and should you decide to remain, prepare for a future in which Grace turned and left the room, first considering our principles. Boardroom, leaving behind shocked and intelligent eyes. The walls of old power had collapsed, and Grace Walker, the lady once ignored in her faded red shirt, they now drove Titan Industries into a fresh direction. Emma Brown silently followed Grace with a renewed sense of faith. This was not just her life, and everyone else's will be permanently altered by the company's metamorphosis on the ideals Grace had set. Now respect, collaboration, and patience would become Titan's compass. Emma hurried across the corridor to catch up with Grace, then spoke carefully. Thank you, Grace, for anything. You turned to check at Emma. Emma, just remember one thing. You don't need to thank me. She is smiling warmly. Emma nodded, full of respect. Never let someone tell you where your value is. And thanks, she realized she had just seen a historic event for the business, as well as for her personal. Grace left the structure, staring out at the large metropolis of New York. She had begun from the lowest place, and today she was at the top. Yet what most made her proud was not the might or the money. She had shown that the most crucial values in life were respect of others and patience and endurance. Any company, Titan Industries, will never be the same now, and that was all. Thank you, Grace Walker. She left Jew Titan Industries, the great New York sky opening out before her. The sun glinted off the skyscrapers, but today the scene of the city seemed to have particular significance. Grace stopped for a bit, breathing deeply in fresh air. She sensed the shift all around her and had done not just what none expected, changing Titan Industries from inside, but also altering her whole path of life. From a forgotten cleaner, she had grown to be in charge of one of the biggest corporations in the. Emma Brown left the building when Grace's heart brimmed with respect. With respect, she gazed at Grace, firmly believing that what she had just seen would permanently alter her life. Emma had learnt not only how to run a business, but also how to value individuals regardless of their. Grace grinned as she spotted Emma walking toward. Have you considered? Grace asked Emma with love. Her eyes gleamed with resolve. Yes, I want to remain, and I joined Titan in the first since I believe in the principles you are delivering to this business. Grace glanced at the young woman with hope for her future. Emma, ahead of you. I'm happy you chose this road, but keep in mind the other one won't always be simple. There will be some who oppose change and challenges. Nevertheless, if you remain loyal to what you believe is correct, you'll conquer everything. Emma smiled, feeling deeply motivated by Nana's remarks. She realized that change needed time and patience. Grace had showed her, though, that if one had enough, anyone, anywhere could change things. Drive and regard for oneself inside the structure. The events that had happened in the boardroom still remained like a subdued but strong tsunami the directors had created. Once in charge and authority were now confronting an immutable reality they had. Grace had started the process of adaptation, or leaving the crumbling walls of conceit. Procedure of reorganizing the whole business from its roots. None of them will forget this day, the day a woman, once they had looked down on, had grown to be their leader on New York City streets. Grace and Emma strolled. Though slow, New York's strides were deliberate and confident. Emma walked beside her, a sign of the future of the transformation they would bring about at Titan Industries. Grace stopped at a junction, staring out. She considered the path she had followed from the crowded traffic and the people hurrying along the streets. Days of discreet background cleaning ignored until she stood before. She hadn't only modified her own. The senior directors had declared her power. life, but the life of many others, she turned to Emma's saying with honesty, the most crucial thing, Emma, is never to let someone minimize the worth every one of us has our own. Strength for everyone, not only for myself, as long as we dare to believe in it and apply it the correct manner today. Who's ever been looked down upon, and now will create Titan Industries' brighter future. Emma nodded simultaneously, feeling every word of New York's like a priceless lesson she understood. She was not only employed by a business, she was helping to fulfill a huge mission in terms of change in structure as well as in respect and human values. Grace moved forward, the sunlight streaming on her face. The city of New York with its soaring skyscrapers seemed now a place where everyone from anyone may rise, not only a sign of achievement and power. New York recognized her whether she had sufficient will and patience in her heart. Journey wasn't finished, there was still much to be done, many changes to make. Today, she had proved true strength lied in patience, respect, and the capacity to bring about change, not in power. Even the slightest details, and from today, Titan Industries would no longer be a place of conceit and ignore. It would come to represent justice, respect, and the capacity to surpass all difficulties. And it all began with a woman in a faded red shirt cleaning not just he office, but also Grace and Emma's poisonous company culture followed their movements across the crowded streets. Driven with hope and will, a fresh chapter of Titan Industries had started, and owing to the bravery and tenacity of people like Grace Walker, the future seemed better. That day, Titan Industries not only altered but also permanently remembered the tale of Grace Walker, the lady who was previously undervalued, yet rose to take charge of everything. Thanks you for following Grace Walker's inspirational. If this story piques your curiosity and relevance, kindly hit like, share with your friends, and avoid. Thank you for not forgetting to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss future tales with great inspiration. Assist, and see you in the next video. Disclaimer. This channel stands against all forms of intolerance, discrimination, racism, and violations of human rights. The stories shared here are original creations, developed to encourage reflection, understanding, and constructive dialogue. All content is produced with a commitment to respecting diversity and honoring human dignity.